Test 4. Summarize spoken text. Page 136. 1.
People these days increasingly complain of suffering from allergies, to pollen, to cats, to dust, to certain foods like peanuts or shellfish, for example. But what exactly are allergies and why do we develop them? Well, an allergy is the body reacting to something that is trying to harm it. Sometimes the reaction is mild, sneezing or a rash perhaps, but in extreme cases it can be life-threatening. In an allergic reaction, the body is stimulated to produce histamines, which help to get rid of what is harmful. So, your eyes and nose may stream as a way of losing irritating particles, or your skin may itch in order to make you scratch it and so remove any harmful parasites. In some societies these days, allergic reactions occur without the person being in a harmful situation. However, in situations where, say, hygiene is less developed, then the body's immune system spends its early years fighting off genuine problems, and so does not tend to overreact to harmless irritants at a later stage. So, how to deal with an allergy? The first step has to be to ascertain what triggers the allergic reaction, and then to avoid contact with that allergen as far as is possible. If avoidance is impossible, antihistamines can be prescribed to minimize the symptoms experienced by the sufferer.
Two.
Travelling in the mind's eye, through reading and more recently through electronic media, is a European habit of long standing. Ever since the age of discoveries in the Renaissance, Europeans have been interested in reports of life in faraway places. Of all the places in which Europeans were interested, America has received more attention than others, for a variety of reasons, the most important of which is that many Europeans themselves emigrated there. The report about America from the person who has been there is a literary genre that Europeans have devoured. As Europeans watched the United States grow from a British colony to one of the dominant nations of the world, a pattern of conversation developed among them about the meaning of this emerging colossus of the New World. There emerged a question, aptly stated by Richard Rose: is America inevitable or inimitable? The question is easier to ask than to answer, and both sides of the question are amply represented in American and European writing about America. The one stresses the uniqueness of America, that no nation or people can be compared with the experience of Americans. The other stresses that America is the forerunner of what European, even world society will be tomorrow.
Test 4. Multiple choice. Choose multiple answers. Page 137. 1.
So today I'm going to talk about the key things you need to remember when you go out into the world as translators. The first thing is to be choosy about what commissions you accept. It's not advisable to agree to do every job you're offered, even if you're in need of work. You should refuse to do something if you don't know anything about the topic, as it would be impossible for you to produce a good piece of writing. And it could be serious. A mistranslation that's going to be used for medical or legal purposes could have disastrous consequences. Having decided you can reasonably take on a commission, if you have the slightest doubt about what something means, then consult a dictionary or someone whose mother tongue is the language you're translating from. It's much better to devote a bit of time and effort to checking something than to risk making a potentially serious error.
Two.
Today we're going to talk some more about architecture and what makes for a good design. There are, of course, a whole range of qualities that most architects would like their buildings to possess. One of these is the durability of the building. Architects must consider how well the building will stand up to the ravages of climate and time. Will it remain robust and in good condition? Clearly, requirements will vary according to the surroundings of the building in question. A design that is suitable for Dubai will have different needs from one for Moscow. Then, of course, it's essential to consider the appearance of the building. Regardless of what its purpose may be, will people find pleasure in looking at it? An original and still respected writer on architecture, the Roman Vitruvius, wrote in the 1st century that a building should delight people and should raise their spirits. Again, tastes may vary from one society to the next, but the principle remains the same.
Test 4. Fill in the blanks. Page 138. 1.
I'd recommend that you all try to get hold of English in the Southern Hemisphere by Nolan and Watts, as this provides an excellent overview of the topics that we're going to be covering in this module. It's really our primary text. It has particularly strong sections on the history of English in Australia and New Zealand, examining in some depth how the language has developed in these countries. The sections on phonology and on vocabulary will be invaluable when you're doing the written assignment, which I'm going to be telling you about in a moment once I've given you the details of a couple of other essential references.
Two.
This week, we're going to be continuing our discussion of women in society. Last week, we looked at a number of issues relating to women in education. If you remember, we discussed women both at school and at university. Today, we're going to be considering the roles that women play in the workplace. Again, we'll start by taking a historical perspective, and inevitably you'll find that many of the same events that impacted on women in education also had a major influence on their working lives. In the second half of the lecture, I'll concentrate on the situation in Europe today, and I'll invite you to suggest how you think things are likely to develop over the next decade. Okay, so let's get started.
Test 4. Highlight correct summary. Page 139. 1.
I'd like you to think for a moment about your hands and all the things you can do with them. You can use them to write or to drive. You can thread a needle, play the drums, build a wall, and so on and so forth. They can be careful and precise. Think of someone doing eye surgery, for example. But they can also generate huge forces. And here you might think of the sports person throwing a discus or lifting a heavy weight. How is it possible for our hands to be so incredibly flexible? Well, it's all down to the extraordinary complexity of the bones, ligaments, nerves, and muscles that lie beneath the skin of our hands. There are, for example, 9 muscles alone controlling just one thumb. Some of these are anchored to bones within the hand, while others link to the arm.
Two.
A new investigation into shark populations in the waters off Australia has discovered that there are 2 distinct species of great white shark, one to the east and one to the west of Bass Strait. This was discovered by tagging large numbers of sharks in the coastal waters all round Australia. Rather to the investigators' surprise, they found that while sharks from the east side certainly travelled to the west side of the continent and vice versa,
they always return to their home areas to breed. The two types of shark were found to have a distinct genetic makeup, indicating that interbreeding has not taken place. The implication of these research findings is that sharks may be more susceptible to changes in local marine environments than had previously been thought.
Test 4. Multiple choice. Choose single answer. Page 141. 1.
Animals, as well as humans, are affected by noise. There is evidence to show that some whales, for example, died when they beached themselves after being exposed to excessive sonar, the noise produced by submarines as they navigate underwater. It's been shown that whales produced louder sounds when communicating with each other when sonar equipment was on in their vicinity. This was doubtless because they needed to make themselves heard by their fellows, perhaps to warn each other of danger or tell one another about a food source. Another example of how noise can affect animal behavior is given by the European robin. In urban areas, this small bird sings at night rather than during the day.
Two.
So next Wednesday you're all going to be doing your presentations. We'll have to be very strict about timing. 15 minutes each, not a minute more. It might make sense to do a practice run-through at home, but that's up to you. I'm going to ask you to put an abstract of your presentation on our course website, but I'd like you to do that after you've given your talk. Come with your slides on a memory stick. That's the most straightforward way of dealing with things, I think. Oh, and don't forget to bring handouts for everyone. There won't be time to do photocopying that morning. So, any questions?
Test 4. Select missing word. Page 142. 1.
This year, we're planning to use a different type of assessment on this module. In the past, students were required to complete 2 long written assignments and also to do a presentation on a subject of their own choice. We've decided to ask you to write 4 shorter pieces of written coursework this year. We're also going to be more prescriptive about what you focus on in your presentation. This is because previously many students lost marks unnecessarily, simply because
Two.
In 19th century Britain, and indeed in the first half of the 20th century, many of the urban poor lived in extremely cramped conditions. Overcrowding, damp and poor sanitation affected the daily lives of the majority of the population, with serious implications for their own and their children's health. Novelists have a major role to play in reflecting their times to their readers who may otherwise ignore social problems, and the portrayal of the wretched living conditions of the impoverished by such writers as Charles Dickens in the 19th century and George Orwell in the 20th century was instrumental in
Test 4. Highlight incorrect words. Page 143. 1.
English had barely established itself as a language in England when it began moving to other countries to be used there as well. First it headed north to Scotland and then west to Wales. It then made its way across the sea to Ireland. That was in the Middle Ages. Over the course of the following centuries, it has put down roots all over the world, from the USA to South Africa, from India to New Zealand. Of course, in all these countries, it has developed in special ways to suit the new contexts in which it found itself.
Two.
Researchers at the University of California claim to have discovered that people who eat chocolate regularly tend to be lighter than those who rarely eat it. The findings may seem surprising in that chocolate has a great many calories, and in general, the more calories people consume, the more likely they are to put on weight. The recent studies emphasize that it is more the regularity with which people eat chocolate that is significant, rather than the amount they consume. Whether they eat a little or a lot seems to make no difference, whereas eating it frequently appears to reduce weight more than only having it occasionally.
Test 4. Write from dictation. Page 144. 1.
The new theory takes all the latest research results into account.
2.
The period was a golden age of English literature.
3.
Essential textbooks can be purchased from the campus bookshop.
Copyright Pearson Education Limited, 2013.